Okay, there we go. So welcome to the April 2024 PRC meetings. A good crowd, so that's nice to see. We have a couple of regrets. Lynn can't make it, and Rob is in Bali on holidays. I think we have to impose some kind of penalty on him for not being here and being there, because that's, I'm sure, wonderful. In any event, those are the regrets that we have. We do not have minutes from last meeting. We'll have that for the next ones. But firstly, can I have a motion to approve the agenda as circulated? John, and a seconder. Brendan, all in favor? All right, thank you. And again, we'll return to the minutes for last month before our next meeting. News and announcements. The only active item on that list right now is the matter of the Bell Reform brief prepared by Howard and his very able students. So, and that's now, everybody received an email from Irving that it's gone to the board for approval. Does Howard or Irving want to say anything about that before we move on?
I think we've heard from about 5 board members, but I think we should give it a couple of days and then shoot it out.
May I just say a couple of things briefly? One is, Andrea, I saw your email from yesterday. I haven't had a chance to compare the two, but I'm quite open to adding something a little bit more directed at government. And if I get the intent of your email, it's about make sure we're including the provinces and territories and adding the efficiencies notion. Andrea, once we give the board, once we give the brief to PRC and PRC sends it to the board, the students and I kind of lose control of it. But I wanted to suggest, Andrea, if you could just to maybe take the recommendation 4 and add your wording and maybe in revision mode and send it back to us so I can see what you would like to see it look like. But from what I see in your email, I'm certainly open to it. Irving always tells us we shouldn't be pointed towards governments, but what the hell? I'm retired. I don't care. But I'd love to see how you thought it all worked together. But I really liked your comments and your input. I have to say, we're really indebted to Pro Bono Student Canada. Over the last 6-7 years, we've had wonderful products produced almost every year. And this year, students were no exception. But as well, we've had tremendous input from Irving to start with, from John, from Dick, wonderful sort of input on this that's all added to the brief. But I think it's a product that we can be proud of. And I don't think the bail discussion is going away anytime soon. If we can actually make it more of a useful discussion, I think that would be a good idea. But anyway, I hope everyone enjoyed looking at it, and I hope the board signs off on it quickly. So,
yeah, thanks, Howard. It was a terrific brief. So we'll wait and see. That's great. All right. Does anybody have any other news or announcements for the PRC? Yes, Howard.
Just I hate to go on, but I just saw this morning something that I thought was extraordinary, and I wanted to share it with you. I'm trying to put in the chat I'm not getting it, but I was trying to get the web address. There's a Zoom video produced by Harry Laforme, Howard Sapers is in it, and also Pam Palmieter. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her name right, but she's a very competent and articulate Indigenous woman, lawyer, journalist. I'm going to, as soon as I figure it out, send the YouTube link to you. It's about 9 minutes long, and it talks about overrepresentation of the Indigenous population, both in federal and provincial correctional facilities. It focuses mostly on federal, but it's a fabulous little piece, and I just saw it today. I think it was produced just this week. I can't get a real date on it, but any of you who are still teaching or mentoring people, I think it would be great to share this YouTube video widely. It's very well done. And of course, Harry Laforme is one of my heroes, former first Indigenous judge of the Ontario Court of Appeal, and as Miles has told you, one of the co-leads on the recent commission on wrongfully convicted. But also Howard Sapers we know well, and they refer to some of Ivan's work from the Correctional Investigator's Office. But it's a wonderful video. We don't normally put these videos like this in the newsletter, but I'm going to work with Olivia to see if we can incorporate it in some way. It's just extremely well done, and it talks about how Canada has a serious problem that is getting worse, not better. And it talks about Gladue. and how in the end it has not really helped. And some of the Gladue report factors correctional officials regard as increasing the risk of an offender, hence inhibiting their early release, excuse me, and their downward security classification. Anyway, I thought it was worth sharing. I just saw it this morning. It's really a fabulous piece. Bear with me. I'll try and figure out how to send this, there it is. I think you should all see it now in the chat. It's a YouTube link, but have a look at it. It's not long. And again, those of you who are doing some teaching, I think it's a wonderful overview statement to share with students. Just thought I'd add that.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Howard. Anybody have anything else to add for news or announcements? Okay, let's move into then the parliamentary committees. And again, back to Howard for the Commons, Justice and Human Rights. Sound, Howard. Howard, wait, your sound.
Thank you. I forgot I had muted myself. I was apologizing for talking so much. I was hoping not to talk quite as much, but let me try and make this report fairly brief. The Justice and Human Rights Committee has met only twice since our last meeting, and primarily because the House only sat for 1 week and 1 day in March and was not sitting last week. They're back for 2 weeks, but anyway, so just 2 meetings since our last meeting of the Justice and Human Rights Committee. There are 2 things they looked at principally. One is Bill C-332, which I'll come back to. We talked about this last time. And the other thing was supplementary estimates. And for those of you who don't spend as much time as I have and do following the parliamentary monkey business, sorry, strike the monkey, the supplementary estimates are intended only to deal with matters, and I'm actually referring to a definition on the Parliament of Canada website, such as unanticipated spending requirements or items announced in the budget. So that's what sup estimates are supposed to deal with. The estimates, the primary estimates, are supposed to set out the whole plan of government spending. In this appearance by the minister before the Justice Committee on March 21st, the Justice Minister talked on and on and on about Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act, which, if you've been following the press, has been thoroughly criticized by experts in the area. And the bill hasn't even started second reading yet, so it has not been referred to any committee, much less Justice and Human Rights. But the minister spent his whole introductory time talking about this bill to the point where the bloc member on the committee, Fortin, said, gee, I don't know what this has got to do with main estimates, right? And Fortin asked a number of questions about things that would more typically be covered under main estimates, and the minister kept going back to the online harms bill. It really was kind of an incredible magic show, you know, a distraction show where they kept pointing at what they wanted to talk about, which I think is indicative of the fact that they're worried about the C-63 and its progress, because it's been so thoroughly criticized. Other questions raised by committee members were the pace of judicial appointments, what plans has the government got to provide better support for survivors of intimate partner violence? What about the government's response to the recommendations from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Commission? None of these questions were answered. Fortin asked the minister repeatedly about whether he would agree to make all the commissioners for the new proposed, not yet passed commission on wrongful convictions bilingual, a requirement that they all be bilingual. And Fortin asked his question about 5 or 6 times, and the minister never once answered it. He just kept saying, we agree with, we support bilingualism, to the point where Randall Garrison, the NDP member, at one point offered a better answer. Like, if you make all of the commissioners bilingual, it's harder to get good people across the country. But when the NDP guy is helping to explain what's going on here, Miles, I'd love it to hear if you had anything to say about that. But to me, it was striking that the minister really didn't answer any of the questions posed. And this was a supplementary estimates appearance, not an appearance on a bill, certainly not an appearance on C-63. At any rate, one of the other things that was interesting is there's been some discussion back and forth by Anthony Housefather and Randall Garrison about a motion for the committee to conduct studies. Anthony Housefather, focusing on anti-Semitism, and Randall Garrison focusing on Islamophobia. There's been a lot of debate because Randall Garrison introduced one on Islamophobia, and quite rightly so, Housefather was saying, well, what about anti-Semitism? And there's been a lot of discussion and debate. In the end, they agreed on a motion, and I'm just going to read it for you, that pursuant to Standing Order 108 sub 2, and in view of the alarming escalation of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in Canada, the committee undertake a study on the issue of anti-Semitism and a study on the issue of Islamophobia and the additional measures that could be taken to address the valid fears that are being expressed by Canada's Jewish and Muslim communities. Now, both of these are very worthy ideas. They tended to get mixed up, and someone didn't want to focus on one or not the other. Anthony Housefather, who's a very capable man who we met and talked about it when he was chair, talked about he didn't want this just to be the repetition of old tropes. He said he wanted to be serious studies, but he thought the problems were significantly different, that there should be a study on both that are separate studies, not rolled in together and not combined with all sorts of other anti-hate speech and activity. So anyway, the motion is carried. We will see what the Standing Committee does with it, but we all see in the news every day the really horrific and terrifying hate that's even sprung up on university campuses, which I've always liked to believe are more reasonable, but people seeing only one side of the story, and anyway, it is disconcerting that there's a very high level of hate literature, and the Toronto Police have just indicated that by some significant proportion, hate incidents have doubled, if not more. Anyway, keep an eye on all of that. The motion is passed, so we will see what happens. Now, C332, which was the private members bill we talked about last time on controlling our course of conduct, went to clause by clause review on March 18, was passed with amendments by the committee. Report stage has not yet started in the House. I've had a look at the committee's report, which was tabled on March 22nd. It's not easy in any simple way to go back and forth between the report and the bill. And on the parliamentary website, the bill appears as amended by a committee, or as proposed by the committee to be amended. The best I can tell you is that someone's gotten involved and taken this private member's bill and really tried to make it more like a government bill. So there's very significant amendments to it, okay, including right off the bat, they're changing the name of the bill. Sorry, I'm just trying to get to a document here that is not behaving. Instead of the bill originally as tabled was controlling our course of conduct. That's a parenthetical comment in the long title. It has now been changed to course of control of intimate partner. There's an article missing there, of course, but them, not me. There have been significant changes to the bill, including an attempt to make the offense much more precise, okay, which I think was probably the influence of the government behind the scenes. But they've also increased the maximum penalty by indictment from 5 years to 10. In the report, there are a lot of amendments that are what I would call consequential. So places where you need to insert the section number in other provisions of the code and other statutes. But they appear to have really kind of focused much more specifically and tried to make the offense more detailed. But one of the things that is I've indicated that in the past we've talked about this idea and worried about it in the PRC because the offense becomes so difficult to define, to prove, for anyone to reply to. Even in the bill as amended by committee, there's a paragraph of a subsection that suggests that threatening to die by suicide or to self-harm is a form of coercive and controlling conduct against an intimate partner. So if you're, upset with your partner and say, oh, I can't stand this, I'm going to kill myself, or, I feel like, shoot myself in the head, under some circumstances that could violate the offense, which on indictment could be a 10-year penalty. Anyway, I worry about all of this. I have tremendous concern about the epidemic of sexual and intimate partner and family violence going on, even against children. It's not just intimate partner. I'm not sure this bill is going to help. And there's a tendency to rush to put lots of things in the criminal code that add to the length of the code, but not to its clarity. Anyway, stay tuned. It has not yet gone to report stage in the House, but if the committee has approved it as amended, and it looks like the bill has been on the tool bench of justice drafters to try and make it more consistent. They've even added a coming into force provision, which says the bill will not come into force except by order of the Governor General and Council. Before, the private members bill was silent, which meant it would come into force on royal assent. Anyway, lots going on here. Even though there were only 2 meetings, there are a lot of implications of all of this, but let me stop there. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Howard. I just have one comment when you were talking about Fortin and Bill C-40. He was very active in the committee work after second reading. I mean, there was probably 6, 7, 8 actual meetings, and he was very active. He was certainly when I appeared before the committee. He never, and to the best of my recollection, I think I watched most of the committee work. The proposition that the members of what will be commissioners for this particular body are bilingual, that was never, I don't think he ever brought that up as a function of amending the proposal that was before the committee. Bringing it up now, and the problem is, is that the act itself is now, with a very small amendment, is the way it was proposed initially, and so there's nothing in it that would indicate bilingualism would be a requirement for the membership. The membership is defined in the bill to some degree. There's going to be 7 to 9 members. The membership is going to have lawyers and non-lawyers. The majority can be lawyers, but no more than that. So if there's 7 members for it, the most can be lawyers, and the balance non-lawyers, that kind of thing. Anyway, having said that, I think the response that Howard, you referenced, that it would limit to some degree those who would be capable to sit on this committee, on the commission, would be basically hindered if they had to be bilingual. I suppose it could be imposed, but I doubt it very much will be. And likewise, and it sounded like there wasn't a lot of, a very well thought out response by the minister, and that's a concern that I have, and I talk to Innocence Canada all the time on this issue because we're following it very closely with Win Wehar, who runs Innocence Canada, and we're a little concerned about the current Minister of Justice dedication to this particular bill and seeing it go forward. Lametti, we were very pleased with. The TT, it was a personal project for Lametti, and he was very keen on seeing it proceed. That's why he called it the David and Joyce Milgaard bill, basically, act. This particular Minister of Justice, we haven't seen a lot of that kind of dedication that Lametti had, so we're kind of a little concerned about its progress. It has moved out of committee. It's the report's been tendered. But we haven't seen anything moving it on to third reading. So we're just sitting and watching. But anyway, thanks, Howard, for mentioning that. I appreciate it. Does anybody else have any other comments or questions for Howard on the Justice Committee? Okay, thank you. Sorry, the next committee in the Commons is Public Safety. So again, Rob is away, so he's given me his notes to read. So I'll do that with respect to SECU. So there were 3 meetings. The first held on March the 18th when SECU resumed its clause-by-clause study of Bill C-26, an act respecting cybersecurity, amending the Telecommunications Act, and making consequential amendments to other acts. I have nothing of interest to report to the PRC on this. The next meeting was held on March 21st. This was the meeting I mentioned during the previous PRC about the transfer of offenders that had generated a lot of discord and debate among SECU members when they were planning it, who to invite, how many meetings, etc. In any event, the Minister of Public Safety attended along with the top public officials from each of his public safety portfolios, CVSA, CSIS, etc. I reviewed the evidence and noted the topic of offender transfers had some prominence during the meeting, but I really didn't see anything new presented on that topic. Members went on to question the minister and his officials on a number of other topics, including online child exploitation, Russian election interference, vehicle thefts, the rise in extortion attempts targeting the South Asian community across Canada, and the effectiveness of the gun buyback program. In the end, there was some focus on offender transfers. There was actually pretty good coverage through questioning by members on other topics relevant to the minister's mandate and priorities. The third meeting was held yesterday on April the 8th, resuming SECU's clause-by-clause review of Bill C-26. All right, and that is it. If we have any questions for Rob when he returns, hopefully for next meeting, we can certainly address them then. Okay, the next meeting is now moving to the Senate, so it's Legal and Constitutional Affairs, and that would be Brendan.
All right. So like Howard said, the Senate hasn't been saying too much. So the committee has only met twice since our last meeting, both of them to address Bill S-250. So again, it's a private member's bill by Senator Boyer from Ontario. It's about non-consensual sterilization procedures. The committee had a fair amount of witnesses, several from the government, as well as medical professionals from the Canadian Medical Association, notably, as well as the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada, some First Nations Health Authority, and notably the National Council of Indigenous Midwives. I think I brought this up at our last meeting. I first had some concerns about how some things were being defined, and I'm perhaps not happy, but I feel vindicated in the fact a lot of the witnesses had similar concerns with this bill. Actually, let me take one step back. So the government, so officials from the Department of Justice and Indigenous Services Canada appeared before committee. They didn't have opening remarks, and they're actually admonished by the committee for not having remarks. The senators thought that it was likely because the government likely didn't want to take a stance on this bill for or against it. Again, conceptually, the bill is to avoid non-consensual sterilization of Indigenous women, though the bill is not specific for Indigenous women. It does not specify Indigenous women. It's just about sterilization procedures generally, as there have been cases historically and in recent memory of, for example, Indigenous women finding out later in life that they were sterilized at some point during some surgery. All witnesses were very much on board with the idea. Again, I don't think it's something crazy. I think it's very reasonable for everyone to be on board conceptually. But there were concerns raised about some of the wording of the bill and how it might be overbroad. One of the main people, actually the person who had the most concerns was the president of the Gynecologists and Obstetricians of Canada. She noted that this could cause fear among doctors to perform necessary procedures in some situations and could actually put the health of women at risk. You'll note that I'm speaking about women, but theoretically this bill actually doesn't specify women. So theoretically it could be sterilization procedures for men, which is where some of the concerns of being overbroad emerge. Because, for example, could a vasectomy could that be read into this bill potentially? And so there were fears that we could actually jeopardize health. Several individuals noted that they didn't have those concerns, and very few organizations actually brought forward amendments. One thing that stood out to me, and I was a little disappointed in it, honestly, was the Canadian Medical Association. They came in, they appeared, they said they were very in favor of this bill. They had no amendments to propose. They were questioned a little bit in more specifics about these concerns about being overbroad or perhaps having a chilling effect on doctors. They said that they didn't have those concerns, and they felt that doctors would be able to make decisions without questioning what they're doing. Their thought is, oh, well, we're protected for protecting life and things like that. We won't be criminalized for that. And the senators questioned a little further, being like, are you basing this understanding of doctors being protected on, I believe it's Section 45 of the Criminal Code, which protects doctors from liability in certain surgeries if they're doing goodwill, more or less. I forget the exact terms. They said yes, it's based on that part of the criminal code that they feel that doctors would be okay. However, they did not know that this bill also says that notwithstanding Section 45, that that these new provisions would apply. So essentially, this bill would say, well, kind of ignore Section 45, which normally protects doctors. So I admit I was a little disappointed that the CMA would come out in favor with no amendments, but then not realize that the protections they rely upon are being undermined. So that reinforces some of the concerns that some of the other doctors have, some of the concerns that I had as well. So I think that the consensus that there might need to be some tweaks, but as of yet, I've seen no proposed amendments. And the committee has not moved forward after those discussions. They haven't had any more meetings on this topic. And in fact, the next two meetings are for another bill. Actually, I believe it's a government bill. So I'm not sure when they're going to return to S250, but that's where they left it off. I might just note the next two meetings proposed for this committee are on it's criminalizing the importation and caging of elephants and I believe gorillas or apes. I'm not sure the term they use, but anyway, so I don't think I'm going to cover those unless people think that's necessary. But yeah, I will leave that there unless anybody has any questions for me.
Thank you, Brendan. Are there any questions or comments for Brendan? Okay, thank you very much. And lastly, we have the Senate Human Rights. Dick, that's up to you, please.
There have been two meetings of this committee since the last PRC meeting. On March 18th, the committee continued its study of the government's response to the committee's report from 2021 on human rights of federally sentenced prisoners. Three witnesses were heard that day. They all said pretty much the same thing. The witnesses were the correctional investigator of Canada, Ivan Zinger, and two representatives of St. Leonard's House. And the two main comments were these witnesses praised the Human Rights Committee's report, and they also echoed previous witnesses' criticism of the government response, which is basically that the government failed to give any specific reaction, specific comment on individual recommendations, and there were 71 of them. So the idea that the government's response was quite general and didn't really, too superficial in other words, and didn't really respond in an adequate way to the recommendations. The second meeting was just yesterday, late afternoon and early evening. I've only seen the video of this quickly. This switched the committee's focus to a different topic. They returned to their study of refugees, also referred to as forced global displacement. They heard from 6 witnesses, a couple law professors, one from UBC and one from the University of Ottawa, focused on the new protocol, which expands the Safe Third Country Agreement across the entire border with the United States and prohibits refugees from making asylum claims at points in between ports of entry. And they just pointed out how rough this was going to be, what negative consequences it would be having. The next two witnesses were focused, well, first of all, it was a Canadian Council for Refugees and also the Refugee Council of the United States. And they pointed out, the Canadian group pointed out that refugee claimants, as I'm sure we're all aware, often end up homeless in this country, and as recently as the last couple of weeks, 2 have died. The refugee claims have risen over the last 2 years by more than 50%. In 2022, there were 90,000 claims, and in 2023, there were 144,000 claims. The U.S. Refugee Council representative, his primary comments seemed to be how great Canada was on this issue. He said Canada has a very good reputation, a world leader, he said, regarding refugee settlement, and he lamented the fact that the United States is so far behind. The next two witnesses were one, Pathways International, with a representative from the University of Ottawa, and the Global College University of Winnipeg. They mainly talked about refugee sponsorship, the refugee sponsorship program in Canada. It was apparently the first in the world, and the representative went on to explain it's now an international organization. There is an international organization to expand basically the Canadian model across the world. And there's been a major expansion in the United States as a result of their efforts. And the other comment that came out, this was from the Global College representative, also on refugee sponsorship, is that the government through, and she gave some statistics, but it's clear that from those statistics that the government is becoming far too dependent on private sponsorship, and there isn't a sufficient government role to deal with this issue. And that was it.
Oh, thank you, Dick. That's very comprehensive. Any comments or questions for Dick on that report? All right, thank you. So that's it for the parliamentary committees. We don't have anything new under business arising, which takes us to the bills under consideration. And as Howard noted, there wasn't a lot of days basically dedicated to sitting, so very little happened. However, we did have, and again, as Howard mentioned, we had the first reading on Bill C-63 that took place on February 26th that deals with the Online Harms Act. And we also had, let's see, nothing else on public bills. I think we have a second reading on one. I'll just bear with me. Yeah, we had, and again, Howard mentioned this bill C, private C-332, controlling coercive conduct, and it had second reading on February the 7th. And that was it. So we had that's the only activity we've had since our last meeting. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to the meeting before we pack it in for the day?
Yeah, I'd just like to Miles,
Sure.
just as a quick update, Bill S-281, this is also known as Brian's bill from Alberta here. Just to remember, it was about Brian Lessick, who was murdered at the University of Alberta along with his colleagues. And the individual charged ended up being one of the first ones to get the extended consecutive life terms, which since been overturned. So that's what the genesis of this bill. It has done nothing at all since November the 8th, first reading, 2023. That being said, it's still somewhat alive being talked about because Michael Cooper from St. Albert, he's a member of Parliament. He's been presenting petitions regarding the bill and looking for support from the community. So it's not dead. It's just not doing anything. It's just sort of lying there, not barely breathing at the moment. The other thing, which is really important, is on the Alberta Provincial Police. Mike Ellis, the minister, and now actually deputy premier. There's a new bill laying the groundwork. It's Bill 11, and it basically it's an amendment to the public safety statutes, to establish an independent policing agency governed by a civilian oversight board to oversee operations and provide accountability for its officers. It's just been recently introduced and has not been passed yet. The provincial government is basically according to Ellis, is building out the sheriff service that we have here, who are peace officers under other legislation, the Peace Officer Act, just in case the RCMP decide to pull out when the contract expires in 2032. That is really more of a political statement than anything else, sort of giving a justification. And a very interesting comment that I think does resonate across the country is quote, the RCMP just does not have enough human beings to police Canada, regardless of the amount of money that we give them. I think that's a very interesting comment, especially given the various commissions that have gone on regarding the RCMP, and most recently the Mass Casualty Commission and what's happened down there as well. The bill itself is of concern, obviously, to the National Police Federation, which is the RCMP union, and they are extremely political and are politicizing policing in general right across the country. And then the other thing too is that the opposition party here, and we only really have two parties, NDP and Conservatives. The opposition party see this really as just the government trying to top or build up their base, mostly a rural base, a conservative base, and I think John would back that up with me just in terms of where the base for that comes from. So I just want to give you that little update to that. This actually puts it in a whole different perspective now, because from going from a provincial police, which is one thing, and then trying to revamp or incorporate the sheriffs, that adds a really interesting twist to the whole argument, because the sheriffs is not the best thing to be taking over the province. They've got as much problems, well, not quite as many, but they've got a number of problems similar to what the RCMP would have anyways. And so it brings up a very interesting conundrum in terms of policing. And then the issue of cost is still there, but as one recognizes, it is the provincial obligation to fund the administration of justice, and so still on the province. So I just want to give you that update on that.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. We have that. That takes us right back to the first page of the agenda with you preparing a draft brief on this particular issue. If you can send me a few words about what you were just saying, and perhaps the provincial citation, statutory citation, I'll update the comments under that issue.
Okay.
And announcements and updates.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And you're quite right. Bill S-281 is the very last bill that we have in the agenda with absolutely nothing happening on it. So thank you for that too. Anything else, anybody? Yes, Howard.
Well, it's just a sort of an overview comment for us to sort of pay attention to, and that is the extent to which, and Brendan and Dick may have other thoughts on this, but the extent to which the committees in the House and the House itself are occupying themselves with private members' bills. It has always been the case that there are huge numbers of private members' bills, much more so than government, and a lot of members who are not, in cabinet or shadow cabinet. It's one of their ways to speak on an issue of importance to them. So there have always been large numbers, but they seem to be gaining traction and progressing through the House. And some decades ago, when I was still with Justice, there was always a push on to give private members more of a voice and to take seriously their proposed legislation. And a lottery system was established, so some of them would be allowed to go forward. But the private members' bills are not drafted by professional drafters. They're not, with odd exceptions, they're not put together by professional policy people or professional drafters. And sometimes the legislation is significantly flawed because of that. Overly broad definitions, lack of coordination with other parts of the criminal code, just on technical issues apart from what's going on. But I'm wondering, for us as an issue, and certainly part of it is the tendency to give private members more of a voice, and that makes sense. That's more of a representative democracy kind of thing, but one has to wonder about the quality of the legislation. But I suspect part of the picture as well is that the government seems to be receding. It doesn't seem to be introducing as many bills or pushing them along, and even the bills like the wrongful conviction bill languish. They don't seem to be back in the day, we used to, the party whip, and there was there was a concerted effort by a minister's office to keep moving a bill forward, but a lot of the important bills seem to be important government bills seem to be languishing and dying with prorogation. And we're all thinking, you know, at any time there could be a federal election, depending on how the polls align. But it seems that a lot of our focus and a lot of the criminal justice policy focus is changing away from government legislation to private members' legislation. And there are risks in that. There are benefits as well, that some issues come forward that government is reluctant to take on because of its controversial nature or because they don't see a win. But anyway, I think it's just something about the changing landscape and amendments to the criminal code and the correctional statutes that we should all just be paying attention to and its implications as well. So anyway, 2 cents worth on that.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Appreciate the input, insight. That's great. Thank you, Hart. Anything else, anybody for the meeting? Alrighty, well, thank you very much for attending. We'll be back here, I think it's on the 14th of May. And everybody enjoy yourselves and hopefully the weather gets better and off we go. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.